Hi folks, this is Nat and this is your video lesson on how to convert between fractions, decimals, and percents. So let's start off with the reason this is an important thing to be able to do, and that's because fractions, decimals, and percents are three ways of representing the exact same ideas. For example, the fraction, we'll use some easy ones here, 1/2 is the exact same thing as the decimal 5/10, which is the exact same thing as the percentage 50%. So whether you have 1/2 of something, 5/10 of something, or 50% of something, those three things all represent the exact same amount. So similarly, we could say that 1/4 is the same thing as 25/100ths is the same as 25%. Eventually you'll learn the conversions of a fair number of these just by memory. Knowing really common decimal, fraction, percentage conversions is a really nice way to save you some time. But what we're going to be focusing on today is how to do the conversions when it's one that you don't know. And we're going to be doing that type of thing by type of thing. So we'll start with fractions and how to convert fractions to decimals and how to convert fractions to percentages. The fastest way to convert a fraction to a decimal is actually to just go ahead and treat it as a division problem. For example, if I'm looking at the fraction 3/8 and trying to convert that to a decimal, I'm just going to treat this as its division form. A fraction is just division that we've been too lazy to do. So if we go ahead and do it and actually treat 3/8 as 3 divided by 8, that will give us our decimal form. And for now, we're not going to worry about the computation portion of this. You can go ahead and plug this into a calculator. And if you did, you discover that 3 divided by 8 is 0 and 375 thousandths. Sometimes when we do this, and I'll give you one more example, we have a decimal that goes on forever. So let's imagine for a second that I was trying to find the decimal equivalent of the number 7/11ths. And I wanted to know what 7/11ths was as a decimal. Well, all I have to do to find that is, again, treat it as 7 divided by 11. For now, I'll just plug it into a calculator, and I would find that that is 0 and 6363, repeating forever and ever. Because it's repeating, I could choose just to actually put a repeating symbol, which is the little bar above the repeating digits, off forever and ever. Or alternatively, I could choose to just round it, maybe to the nearest hundredths, because it's 6363 repeating over and over again. If I rounded that to the hundredths place, it would end up being 64 hundredths. It's about 64 hundredths. If I want to convert a fraction to a percentage, what I actually need to do is set it up as a proportion. That's the fastest way to make that conversion. What that means is I take my fraction that I want to convert, and let's go ahead and say, in this case, I want to convert the fraction, 4/7. And I'm going to convert that to a percentage by setting it up as a proportion. This is very similar to the solutions we find when we're trying to solve for a pie chart. Except instead of out of a 360-degree pie chart, I'm wondering what is 4/7 out of 100, because a percentage, if we remember, is out of 100. So here's what that proportion looks like. 4/7, 4 out of 7, is equivalent to something out of 100. Hopefully that looks pretty familiar. So 4 out of 7 equals x out of 100. Anytime I have a proportion, I can solve that by cross-multiplying. So I'll do 4 times 100, 7 times x, so 7x will equal 400. I finished my equation solving by dividing both sides by 7. I was multiplying x by 7, so I solved by dividing by 7. These 7's cancel out. My x value, my percentage, is 400 divided by 7. Again, I'm plugging that into a calculator, and I end up with 57 and an unending decimal going 14286, so on. And at some point I just have to decide where to round to. I'm probably going to round my percentages to the tenths place. So that 57 and 1/10 percentage, 57 and 1/10 percentage is good enough. That'll be my final percentage that I give. Thankfully, fractions end up being the most computation-heavy stuff that you're going to do. So when you start with a fraction, you're going to end up doing more computation than anything else. Converting a decimal to a fraction or a decimal to a percent ends up being significantly easier. Here's how that goes. If I want to convert a decimal to a fraction, what I'm actually going to be thinking about to make life easy is the word form of that decimal. Here's what I mean by that. If I'm thinking about the decimal 0 and 623 thousandths, well, that's a fraction as well. 623 thousandths. And I'm done. If I'm thinking about the decimal 7 hundredths, again, that's a fraction. I can think of that as just 7 hundredths. And we talked about in class how those are basically equivalent values. There are a couple really easy ways to think about converting a decimal to a percentage, and I don't really care which one you use. One way is to imagine that you're just moving the decimal point over 2 places to the right. The other is to imagine that you are multiplying by 100. So, for example, if I was going to take that same decimal, 0 and 623 thousandths, I could convert that to a percentage simply by moving my decimal 2 places to the right. Some people like to call this the butt cheek method because it ends up looking like a pair of butt cheeks when you draw it out. That ends up with a percentage of 62 and 0.3%. We make sure we put in this percentage sign because otherwise it's not a percent. I may have missed that on the fraction one. The alternative, multiplying by 100, gets you the same thing. 0 and 623 thousandths times 100 makes that same answer. So it doesn't really matter what you do. It works both ways. But functionally, it's the same number with the decimal moved 2 places to the right. Converting a percentage to a fraction or a percentage to a decimal also ends up being relatively easy. To convert a percentage to a fraction, all you have to do is remember that a percentage always means out of 100. Percent literally means out of 100. So if I want to know what 74% is as a fraction, I can just say, well, that's 74 out of 100. If I want to know what 6% is as a fraction, again, it's just 6 out of 100. So recognizing that a percent is always out of 100 is going to make your life really easy, particularly on this one. Converting a percent to a decimal is the exact opposite of converting a decimal to a percent. One thing we can do is move the decimal place 2 places to the left. The other way of thinking about it is to divide it by 100. So as an example, 15 and 0.3% could be made a decimal simply by moving the decimal 2 places to the left, making it 0 and 153 thousandths. Again, that is the exact same thing as taking 15 and 3/10 and dividing it by 100. You end up with the exact same answer. The only real time this tends to mess students up is when you're dealing with a percentage that's in the ones, or where you can't see the decimal place. So if I'm trying to convert 6% into a decimal, first of all, I have to realize that the decimal is next to the 6 on the right. Then I can again move it 2 places to the left. I'll have to add a 0 as a placeholder to make that work. So the equivalent is 0 and 6/100ths. Alternatively, if you just want to think of it as 6 divided by 100 and punch that into a calculator, it'll do that work for you. It'll be 6/100ths as well. And here's your practice work for this lesson. Your job is to complete this chart. So for each of these 5 rows, you've been given a fraction, a decimal, or a percent. Your job is to convert it into the 2 forms that it is not already in. All right, good luck.